In the exclusive, sun-drenched neighborhoods of Woodland Hills, California, privacy is the ultimate luxury. Behind the high gates and manicured hedges of million-dollar estates, life is supposed to be safe, insulated from the chaos of the outside world. But on a cool afternoon in January 2017, that illusion of safety was shattered in a way that would leave an entire community questioning how well they truly knew their neighbors. It takes a lifetime of relentless work to build an empire, to earn the adoration of thousands, and to create a legacy of beauty. Yet, it takes only a few seconds of primal violence to tear it all down. And sometimes, the monster isn't lurking in the shadows of a dark alley. Sometimes, the monster is the one sleeping right beside you, whispering promises of forever while counting down the minutes until your death. The date was January 23, 2017. The time was just before 5 p.m. The setting was the backyard of a sprawling luxury home, a place that should have been a sanctuary. Instead, it became a slaughterhouse. A 16-year-old girl, arriving home from school, walked into a scene that no horror movie could adequately replicate. Her father, a titan of the beauty industry, a man known for his infectious smile and boundless energy, was lying on the patio. He wasn't just injured, he had been obliterated. As the first piercing scream of a teenager echoed off the canyon walls, the clock began ticking on one of the most twisted, deceptive, and cold-blooded investigations in Los Angeles history. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was a masterclass in betrayal. When the first responders arrived at the Sementilli residence, the air was thick with panic. The paramedics worked frantically, but the man on the patio, 49-year-old Fabio Sementilli, was beyond saving. The violence inflicted upon him was personal. He had suffered catastrophic injuries to his neck and upper body, wounds delivered with such ferocity that they suggested rage rather than simple utility. To the patrol officers securing the perimeter, the initial theory seemed obvious. A black Porsche 911 was missing from the driveway. Two hooded figures had been spotted on neighborhood surveillance cameras jogging toward the house shortly before the attack. In a wealthy enclave like Woodland Hills, home invasions are a feared reality. It looked like a burglary gone wrong, a tragic case of a homeowner surprising thieves who then panicked and lashed out. But as the sun set, and the homicide detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department began their methodical work, the robbery narrative started to crumble under the weight of the physical evidence. Detective Ryan Verna, a seasoned investigator, noticed the discrepancies almost immediately. Robberies are usually chaotic. Thieves toss drawers, empty safes, and grab anything that glitters. They want high value and low resistance. But here, Fabio was still wearing a Rolex watch worth thousands of dollars. His wallet, filled with credit cards and cash, was still in his pocket. Inside the house, nothing else appeared to be disturbed. There was no forced entry. The killers had walked in as if they were invited. The timeline, reconstructed later, was chillingly precise. The surveillance footage showed the two hooded suspects jogging toward the home at 4:18 p.m. At 4:53 p.m., Fabio's prized Porsche roared out of the driveway. Exactly 60 seconds later, at 4:54 p.m., his daughter's car pulled in. The margin for error was non-existent. The killers didn't just get lucky. They knew the schedule. They knew exactly when the victim would be alone, and they knew exactly when to leave to avoid witnesses. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was an execution. Fabio Sementilli was not an ordinary victim. In the world of professional hairstyling and beauty, he was royalty. An Italian immigrant who had come to North America with big dreams, he had worked his way up from the salon floor to become a vice president at Wella, one of the largest cosmetics companies on the planet. He was a mentor to thousands, a charismatic leader who traveled the globe inspiring stylists to better their craft. He was the breadwinner, the rock of his family, providing a lavish lifestyle for his wife of 20 years, Monica, and their children. Friends described their marriage as a partnership of over 2 decades, a union that had weathered the storms of life to reach a harbor of affluence and stability. Or so it seemed. 3 days after the murder, while the investigation was still in its infancy, a memorial was held at the Sementilli home. It is often said that funerals bring out the best in people, but for detectives, they are a hunting ground. Killers sometimes return to the scene, or they insert themselves into the grieving process to deflect suspicion. At this gathering, Monica Sementilli played the part of the shattered widow. Witnesses described her as inconsolable, wandering through the crowd of mourners, repeating a haunting phrase over and over again. "I'm not a wife anymore. I'm not a wife anymore." It was a performance of raw grief, but amidst the tears and the black clothing, a friend of Monica's noticed something, or rather, someone, who didn't fit. Mingling with the family was a man named Robert Baker. He was a racquetball coach, a large, physically imposing man who carried himself with an air of arrogance that clashed with the somber mood of the wake. He was not a colleague of Fabio's. He wasn't a longtime family friend. He was an acquaintance of Monica's from the gym. Yet, here he was, in the inner sanctum of the grieving family, offering comfort. One detail stood out to the observant guest. Robert Baker had a fresh bandage wrapped around his left index finger. It was a small thing, perhaps insignificant in isolation, but in the context of a brutal stabbing where the perpetrator might have cut themselves on a slipping blade, it was a beacon. The friend was so unsettled by his presence and the injury that she discreetly snapped a photo of him and forwarded it to the police. That single image would become the thread that unraveled a tapestry of lies. Detectives focused their lens on Robert Baker. A background check revealed a dark history that had been hidden beneath his veneer of fitness and charm. Baker was a registered sex offender, convicted in the early 90s for crimes involving a minor. This revelation shifted the entire gravity of the investigation. When forensics teams processed the abandoned Porsche 911 found miles away from the crime scene, they discovered trace amounts of blood that did not belong to Fabio. DNA analysis confirmed a match. The blood belonged to Robert Baker. The bandage at the funeral wasn't from a kitchen accident. It was a wound sustained while he was butchering Monica's husband. But physical evidence only tells the who and the how. The why is always more complex. Why would a racquetball coach murder a beauty executive he barely knew? The answer lay in the digital footprint left behind by Monica Sementilli. Investigators obtained warrants for her phone records and discovered a secret life that was as extensive as it was depraved. Monica and Robert Baker had been engaged in a torrid affair for over a year. While Fabio was traveling the world, working tirelessly to fund their lifestyle, Monica was at the gym, falling under the spell of Baker. But this wasn't just a fling. The text messages and emails painted a picture of obsession. Baker, struggling financially and living a life far removed from the luxury of the Sementilli estate, saw Monica as his golden ticket. Monica, in turn, felt a dangerous thrill with Baker that she claimed was missing from her stable marriage. The communications revealed that Baker had systematically isolated Monica. He instructed her to use encrypted apps and burner phones to hide their conversations. Statistics from her phone usage showed that she communicated with Baker more than her husband and children combined. He had become the center of her universe. But simply having an affair isn't a crime punishable by life in prison. The conspiracy to commit murder is. The detectives uncovered a plan that had been months in the making. Baker and Monica discussed the problem of Fabio repeatedly. Divorce was an option, but divorce is messy. Divorce means splitting assets. Divorce means legal battles. And most importantly, divorce doesn't pay out a $1.6 million life insurance policy. Greed, the oldest motive in the book, became the driving force. They didn't just want to be together. They wanted Fabio's money to fund their new life. They fantasized about a future where Fabio was gone and they were free to spend his fortune. The planning was meticulous and chilling. Monica provided Baker with the security codes to the home. She gave him access to the surveillance system, allowing him to watch the house remotely from his smartphone. Imagine the level of betrayal required to give your lover a digital window into your family's private moments, knowing he is using it to hunt your husband. Baker even went so far as to purchase GPS trackers and covertly install them on Fabio's vehicles. He was tracking the man's movements like a predator stalking prey, knowing exactly where he was at all times. But Baker didn't act alone. He recruited an accomplice, a man named Christopher Austin, a friend from Oregon who worked, ironically, in law enforcement probation. Austin was brought in as the muscle, the second hooded figure seen on the video. Baker paid for his flight to Los Angeles, manipulated him with stories of Monica being an abused wife who needed saving, and promised him a cut of the insurance payout. The narrative Baker spun was that Fabio was a monster, a tyrant who made Monica's life a living hell. In reality, Fabio was remembered by everyone else as a gentle, generous soul. The abuse was a fabrication designed to justify the murder to an accomplice. The digital evidence also revealed a failed attempt. The day before the murder, the trio had planned to strike. Monica texted Baker that Fabio was going to the store, signaling a window of opportunity. Baker and Austin lay in wait. But for reasons that remain slightly murky, perhaps a loss of nerve, perhaps bad timing, they didn't go through with it. Fabio returned home that evening, eating dinner with his family, completely unaware that his wife had just tried to have him killed. Most people, after a failed murder attempt, might reconsider their path. They might wake up to the horror of what they are doing. But Monica and Baker were undeterred. They simply reset the clock for the next day. On January 23rd, the plan was executed with military precision. Monica needed an alibi. She told Fabio she was going to Target to run some errands. It was a mundane, innocent excuse. As she drove her black Ford pickup truck toward the store, surveillance cameras captured her stopping in the parking lot. Prosecutors later argued that she met with Baker briefly to give the final go-ahead. She then entered the store, making sure to be seen by cameras, creating a digital record of her whereabouts while her husband was being slaughtered. She texted Baker that the coast was clear. The door to the house, usually locked, was left open. Baker and Austin, dressed in hoodies to obscure their faces, jogged to the house. They entered through the unlocked door. They found Fabio on the patio, relaxed, perhaps enjoying the late afternoon sun after a long week of work. The attack was blitz style. Sudden, overwhelming violence. Fabio fought back. Defensive wounds were minimal, suggesting he was taken completely by surprise, but he was overpowered. Baker, in his frenzy, sliced his own finger, leaving his own DNA mixed with the victim's blood, a biological signature that would seal his fate. They grabbed the keys to the Porsche, not to steal it for profit, but to stage the scene and make their getaway faster. In the aftermath, while the police were still gathering clues, Monica's behavior became increasingly erratic and suspicious to those paying close attention. The grieving widow act began to crack. Within hours of her husband's death, she was inquiring about the life insurance policy. She pushed detectives for a timeline on when the money would be released, showing far less interest in the hunt for the killers than in the status of the payout. She continued her relationship with Baker, but now they had to be even more careful, or so they thought. They took trips to Las Vegas, partying and gambling, behaving like a couple on a honeymoon rather than a widow and a friend in mourning. Monica even introduced herself to strangers as Monica Baker, trying on her new identity like a new dress. The police played the long game. They knew they had Baker on the DNA, but they needed to cement the link to Monica. They needed to prove she wasn't just a cheating wife, but a co-conspirator. They wiretapped phones. They followed the couple. They built a mountain of circumstantial evidence that, when viewed as a whole, was undeniable. The culmination of the investigation came in June 2017. Authorities staged a traffic stop. They pulled over the car Monica and Baker were traveling in, separated them, and arrested them. The interrogation rooms awaited. Even in custody, the depth of their delusion was staggering. Placed in holding cells that were wired for sound, or communicating through jailhouse letters, their obsession continued. Monica wrote letters to Baker, expressing her longing, sexual desires, and undying loyalty. She wasn't horrified that her lover had killed her husband. She was miserable that they were apart. She signed letters as his wife. This wasn't a woman acting under duress or fear. This was a willing, enthusiastic participant. The legal proceedings were a marathon of heartbreak for the Sementilli family. Christopher Austin, the accomplice, saw the writing on the wall. He cut a deal. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he agreed to testify against Baker and Monica. His testimony was devastating. He detailed the recruitment, the planning meetings, the layout of the house that Monica had provided, and the chilling calmness with which they discussed the murder. He confirmed that the robbery was entirely staged. Robert Baker, perhaps realizing there was no escaping the DNA evidence, eventually pleaded no contest to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But in a bizarre twist during Monica's trial, he tried to fall on the sword for her. He took the stand and claimed that Monica knew nothing about the murder plot. He painted himself as a stalker, an obsessed lover who acted alone to free her. He claimed she was innocent of the violence. It was a final, desperate act of manipulation, an attempt to save the woman he had destroyed everything for. But the jury didn't buy it. The prosecution, led by a tenacious district attorney, laid out the timeline. The open door, the alibi, the GPS trackers, the insurance inquiries, the 4:54 p.m. arrival of the daughter, timed so perfectly with the killer's exit. The sheer volume of communication between them. It was impossible for Monica to be ignorant of a plot that relied so heavily on her participation to succeed. The jury saw through the lies. They saw a woman who had grown bored with stability and greedy for more. A woman who viewed her husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle to be removed. In 2025, after a trial that dragged on due to legal delays and the complexity of the case, Monica Sementilli was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The judge, in delivering the sentence, did not mince words. He called her the mastermind. He noted the supreme cruelty of leaving her teenage daughter to find the body, scarring the child for life. All for the sake of money and a midlife crisis fling. Monica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would die behind bars, just like her lover. The tragedy of the Sementilli case extends far beyond the death of one man. It is the destruction of an entire family structure. The children lost their father to violence and their mother to prison. They have to live with the knowledge that the person who gave them life conspired to take away the person who supported it. Fabio's son from a previous marriage now wears his father's Rolex, the same watch that was left on the wrist that day. A symbol that the killers didn't care about the time, only the end of a life. This case serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can reside behind the most polished veneers. We often look at the wealthy,
the successful, and the beautiful with a sense of envy, imagining their lives are perfect. But inside the Sementilli mansion, beneath the chandeliers and the expensive decor, a rot had set in. It was a rot born of entitlement and narcissism.
Monica Sementilli had everything many people dream of: security, a loving spouse, a beautiful home. But it wasn't enough. She wanted the excitement of the bad boy, the thrill of the illicit, and the cold, hard cash of the insurance policy. Ultimately, the perfect murder is a myth. There is always a trace, a drop of blood, a ping from a cell phone tower, a bandage on a finger at a funeral. And perhaps the biggest flaw in their plan was underestimating the tenacity of detectives who speak for the dead. Fabio Sementilli could not testify, but his blood, his car, and his digital life spoke volumes. They told a story of a man who worked hard, loved deeply, and was betrayed by the one person he should have been able to trust with his life. As the sun sets over the Woodland Hills today, the Sementilli estate stands as a silent monument to this tragedy. The community has moved on, but the scars remain. It is a story that warns us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like the person waking up next to you, smiling, while plotting your demise. In the end, Monica and Robert got their wish. They are together in their fate, bound by a life sentence, locked away in concrete boxes, while the legacy of Fabio Sementilli lives on in the students he mentored and the family that truly loved him. The true crime wasn't just the murder. It was the profound waste of life, love, and potential, satisfied on the altar of greed.